Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio lunchtime talk today. These talks are live every Friday at 1 o'clock, both here in the building and online. So whether you're in Bristol or far away, you can join the conversation. My name is Vic. I'm talent development lead at Watershed and I work a lot in the studio here. I am a white woman with a white stripy top and blue trousers, short brown hair. So every Friday we throw open the doors of Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer the chance to spend time in the space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff between 10 and 5. An especially big welcome to those who are new to the studio today, or for whom this might be the first time welcome. So what is Pervasive Media Studio? So we're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology with everything from comedy to coding, product development to performance art. It's a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol, and it's funded by Arts Council England. We offer studio space, which is desk space, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities to our resident community as part of our spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. We are a space for people to take risks with early ideas and make time for collaboration. So a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. So please feel free to move around, make a cup of tea, grab some water from the kitchen if you want to during the talk. We have a quiet space just to the left of the studio here, which is just through that door, left of this space. So if anyone needs a break during the talk, please feel free to use that room. Fire exits are at either end of the studio over that way, and if the fire alarm should go off, the studio team will help direct you where you need to go. We've also got accessible toilets and baby change just in the corridor over there by the kitchen. There's going to be a Q&A at the end of the talk. If you're watching online, you can pop questions in the YouTube chat. Lauatim is our voice in the room for the YouTube chat today, and we'll voice those questions for you. If you're in the building, you can just raise your hand and we'll come to you with a mic. You can get news on all our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at Mastodon on .social on Mastodon, and at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. So after all that, our speaker today is Martin O'Leary, who's our studio community lead here. And Martin's going to introduce some of the thematic ideas that the studio plans to explore around our theme of other minds. Martin.
All right, thank you very much, Vic. Yeah, it's always slightly weird to be standing on this side at the top. Yeah, I'm going to talk about some of these ideas, and this is going to be a bit of a sort of whirlwind tour of some of the ideas that we're thinking about. It is absolutely not complete. We're going to be talking about, I'm going to get to some points and then, take a swerve off in another direction. There are plenty of roads not taken in this. There's plenty of other ways to look at these questions, other questions you might want to ask. We're interested in those too, but we've got, 30, 40 minutes here today, so I'm going to have to be selective. The other thing I want to say is a lot of the work we've been talking about has been focused on AI. That's in some sense why we're doing this. AI is very exciting right now. Everyone's talking a lot about AI. I am going to talk about AI. It is going to take a few minutes. So if you're here to hear about AI, you're not in the wrong talk. It might just take a few minutes before we get there. So anyway, I'm going to start off. So speaking of AI, in 1977, NASA launched 2 spacecraft, the Voyager spacecraft. This was sort of, in a way, the real golden age of NASA. So the moon landings had happened and that program had been cancelled. And the moon landings were just horrendously expensive, one of the most expensive projects the US government has ever done. And NASA's budget got slashed, but it didn't get slashed that much. And so there was a lot of money sloshing around to do other space stuff. And there happened to be, in the late 1970s, a chance alignment of some of the planets in the solar system, which meant that it was possible to send some space probes and do a tour, what they called the Grand Tour, in a slightly colonialist way, of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and then out. And so they built 2 spacecraft, the Voyager spacecraft. They look like this. And they're sort of about the size and weight of a Nissan Micra, if that helps you imagine. And along with the Pioneer probes, which were launched the previous year, they're still out there. They're still going. They are the furthest man-made objects from Earth. And they're also the fastest moving things humanity has ever created. They were launched in the 70s. They are still going. And they're going to keep going, right? They have left the solar system. They are moving at incredible speeds out into the voids between the stars, which are just unimaginably big. And in about 40,000 years, they're going to pass by two other stars, stars which go by the very romantic names of Gliese 445 and Ross 248. They're two red dwarf stars. They're honestly astronomically not very exciting. That just happened to be the direction these things were moving in when they left the solar system. But there was a realization that, like, in space, things don't decay, things don't rust. These probes are going to reach those stars in roughly the same condition that they are in now, right? Like, their power source will die, the electronics won't be working anymore, but like the actual probe is going to get there. And somehow, in the far, far future, there's going to be someone or something might find these. And so there was an idea put forward primarily by the astronomer and science communicator Carl Sagan that we should put a message on these things, that we should write something on them, record something that would like communicate across these great voids of time and space that, like, who made this thing? Why is this Nissan Micra turned up at your star? And so they installed this message on the side of them, and the form it took was this. So this is what's called the Voyager Golden Record. It's actually, this is the cover. There's a gold-plated record that sits behind this, like an actual like LP, basically. It's made of gold-plated copper, and the cover has what are meant to be kind of universal instructions for what this is, what you're supposed to do with it. So they were very concerned, like, how are the aliens who find this going to know what to do with a LP? And so they were like, okay, right, well, we're going to draw a little diagram of a turntable, and like you've got to decode it into sound waves. And they're like, okay, but how fast should you do that? How big should you do that? And like, so, okay, right, there's a diagram of a hydrogen atom here, hydrogen molecule rather, here. So we're going to use that as the scale, and this is like a binary encoding of how fast you're supposed to play it. And someone is supposed to work this out. There are images on there. You know, so this is like sort of describing, okay, you're supposed to like scan back and forth over the image, and that will like produce something. This was, you know, the idea was that this would be a sort of universal communication. And on that record, there are, like I said, there are a series of images. So we start with those sort of binary sort of horizontal and vertical lines, and we explain basic arithmetic. We're like, okay, right, we don't know anything about these aliens. We don't know what kind of creatures they are. We don't know how they think. We don't know anything, but we can be pretty sure that they understand that 1 + 1 = 2. We can be pretty sure that they understand something of mathematics if they are, you know, have developed enough technology to collect a space probe. And so this sort of explains how our number system works. You know, we get 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, what all the symbols mean. You know, we say 2 + 3 = 5, 8 + 17 = 25, and they're supposed to deduce from this what plus means and what equals means and so on. And there's this sequence of images then which gradually get more and more complex and explain more and more. So after you've explained mathematics, you're like, okay, we need to be able to talk about things in the real world. But we don't have any objects in common that we can talk about. So we're like, okay, well, here we have this, our hydrogen molecule again, and we start defining like all of these units in terms of a hydrogen molecule, like the wavelength of the light that's emitted when you have a hydrogen molecule. It's about 21 centimeters. So we're like, okay, 1/21st of that wavelength is a centimeter. Now you know what a centimeter is. We can explain other things in terms of that. And then you go on from that, and you're like, all right, well, let's explain where we came from. Here's a diagram of all the planets in our solar system, and like how much they weigh and stuff. This was very controversial. Some people did not think that we should tell them where we came from. Some people were like, oh, well, do you really want to send your home address to Who knows? And, it's not a totally silly question. Like, should we be broadcasting, you always tell children, when you go out into the world and you meet strangers, don't tell them your address. This is kind of the same thing. And it goes on, there's more and more. I'm skipping several. It doesn't just go immediately from hydrogen molecules to planets. There's more in there. But you go on, and then there's some explanations of biology. So we're like, oh, this is how people are made. There's DNA, there's complex hydrocarbons and things. And it gets more and more complicated, and eventually you get to the point where it's showing like pictures of people, right? Or outlines of people. The reason, by the way, that all of these numbers are something and a half kilograms is that they're actually round numbers of pounds. And the Americans who were making it decided that actually, no, you do talk to aliens in kilograms, and converted it. So there was some things. And then after this, there's a sequence of photos, pictures of Earth, pictures of people, and then it goes into sound, and there's voices introducing in all the languages of the Earth, and a message from the UN Secretary General offering peace to whoever might be out there. And then at the end, there's an hour and a half of music, right? There's, and that starts, sort of, I think it starts with one of the Brandenburg concertos. It's quite, sort of up itself. And there, honestly, it's looking at it, I sort of imagined, oh yeah, this is going to be very Western-centric. It's not. There's quite a lot of stuff from all around the world. They actually put some effort into it. For a, greatest hits of Earth compilation made in the 1970s, it's not bad. And one of the tracks on there, track 11, is Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. Can I just, who knows Johnny Be Good? So everyone, most people, okay, good. So Johnny Be Good is rock and roll song by Chuck Berry from 1958. And it's a fairly autobiographical song about being a young, illiterate black man growing up in the American South and finding success through music. It's a banger. One thing, the lyrics don't mention racism at all. So at the very last minute, Chuck Berry was convinced to change the line "colored boy" to "country boy" because it would sell better to white audiences. And he understood that this was something that you kind of had to do. And when you listen to the track as, a human being, you can hear that sense of like desperation and elation in his voice, that this is someone who has found success knowing that a lot of his peers were not able to do that. This is, it is a great work of art. And that's something which we've decided to send out to the stars. And I think the idea of taking music like this and just throwing it out into the void at who knows what that might never understand it is one of humanity's great works of art. This idea that we have just said, look, I have no idea who you are or what you are, but I want you to understand this. But it does set up this really interesting sort of tension between, there's the things, right, that we were like pretty sure these aliens would be able to understand. The things where we're like, right, I know that these aliens will know about hydrogen molecules. I know that these aliens will know about addition and multiplication. But what I actually want to talk to them about is institutional racism. And the gulf there is enormous. Like, how do you explain racism in terms of hydrogen? You just can't, right? There's something missing there, some massive void, which honestly makes this, 40,000 years and however many light years look like nothing. It's like, well, the real gap is between what we find ourselves able to say and what we actually want to say. So I said I'd get to AI. I often think of this when I'm thinking about, like, do computers understand things? Are we able to explain, when people are like, oh, yeah, we trained the computer on this much data and now it understands how to do this thing. I'm like, can you? Have you managed to surmount that gap? Have you managed to actually communicate in terms of ones and zeros what it means to be a human. So that's where I'd like to start from today. So I think it's worth thinking like, okay, right, we're sending these messages out, but like, what would we do if we received a message? What would we do if someone tried to communicate with us? And the truth is we do that all the time, right? We are surrounded on this planet by other species that communicate, right? And it's worth thinking like, all right, if dolphins, for example, wanted to talk to us and, you know, sent out a golden record, would we understand what it was saying? And, you know, the answer is no, we wouldn't, because we've tried. There've been lots of attempts over mostly the last half century to understand dolphin speech, right? Dolphins produce very complicated sequences of clicks and whistles. We know they're talking to each other. We know that information is being conveyed. We know dolphins have names. Dolphins will produce a series of clicks and whistles. Other dolphins will repeat that series of clicks and whistles in reference to that first dolphin. They remember these over time, long time periods. Dolphins who haven't met each other in 20 years will remember each other's name. So there's definitely something going on there. But, you know, we have these clicks and whistles. We have their diagram of an LP or whatever it is, and we have no idea what it is that they're trying to say. So that's kind of worrying, isn't it? Like, if we can't even communicate with dolphins who, you know, we get to live with, what hope do we have of communicating with things that are much, much more unlike us? But, you know, there is hope as well. Like, people manage to have relationships with dolphins, right? People, this is a researcher, one of the dolphin speech researchers, a woman named Margaret Howe Lovett. She lived with this dolphin named Peter, bottlenose dolphin, for many years. They, you know, had a really close relationship. She taught Peter to say hello, Margaret, except Peter couldn't make the M sound because he's a dolphin and he has neither lips nor a nose, and that's really hard. But they managed to communicate and have a, you know, honestly quite loving relationship for many years. When the funding was cut and they were separated, Peter, the dolphin, actually took his own life. It's really tragic. These relationships that are possible. They are real. But at the heart of them is this massive void of incomprehension. So where does that come from? Why is it that we are unable to communicate with other kinds of being? And there's a really interesting and famous essay in the Philosophy of Mind by a philosopher called Thomas Nagel called "What is it like to be a bat?" And Nagel was really interested in questions about consciousness. You know, what does it mean to be conscious? And the sort of very rough layman's idea of what the definition of consciousness that he was working with was that you are conscious if there is something that it is like to be you. So there is when I am conscious, there's a kind of quality of experience. I can feel like, oh yeah, I am experiencing something. When I'm unconscious, there's nothing that it is like to be asleep. There's no experience that you have. There's no like, oh yeah, that feels like being asleep, because being asleep doesn't feel like anything. It's just not there. And the idea is like, all right, we're pretty sure we're conscious, right? Fairly certain. We're willing to at least entertain the idea that a lot of animals are conscious. They are having an experience. You spend some time with, you know, a cat or a dog or whatever, and you're like, there's a little guy in there. There's something is experiencing life inside an animal. And bats definitely fall into this category. Bats are, you know, in the grand scheme of things, they're very similar to humans, right? They're mammals. They live a social existence. They live in groups and have family structures that are not that different to our own. They're omnivorous. They, you know, compared to, you know, forests or supernovas or whatever aliens are out there, they're pretty similar to people. And so you might be like, all right, can I imagine what it is like to be a bat? Bats are, however, different to humans in a couple of important ways. So bats have a very different sense to us. Their idea of space is probably very different. Bats can fly. They have echolocation, so their eyesight is usually not that great. So the way that bats understand space and the way they have evolved to understand space is through this active process of echolocation and as a three-dimensional medium to move through. We mostly think of space as like 2 dimensions and then there's height as well. But mostly we move around the world in a 2-dimensional way. Bats move around the world in a 3-dimensional way. And we can say, all right, what would it be like if I was a bat? And you can imagine, like, all right, I would, have wings and I would fly and I would, make sounds every so often and find out about the world around me. But that's not imagining what it's like to be a bat. That's imagining what it would be like if you were a bat. But your mind is a human mind. Your mind is capable of, is understanding the world in human terms. And the way that a bat understands the world, the way their internal model of the world works, must be completely different to yours. The way that they think about occupying space must be completely different. And so there's probably qualities of that experience that you can never understand. You can't really understand what it's like to be a bat because your brain is just not the right shape. Your brain understands the ways in which you understand the world and the ways that you have evolved to understand the world are those of a human with a human's senses and a human's ways of operating on the world. So maybe what we have to do is just accept that there are some thoughts that just won't fit inside our minds. There are some ways of thinking that we as humans are just not equipped to be able to do. And vice versa, there are ways of thinking that we have that other beings are just not equipped to do. And that, that's kind of obvious. There are, I can have ideas about economics. Bats probably can't, right? That's not, I don't think that's controversial, but seeing it in reverse and being like, oh, right, yeah, there are probably bat concepts that they wouldn't make sense to me. They would be nonsense. There's just no way of putting them into my mind. So anyway, AI, right, yes. So it's worth thinking then, all right, in these terms, if we're thinking about, okay, consciousness is what is it like to be something, what is it like to be an AI? Is something like ChatGPT conscious? It, by the way, says it isn't. So, that's one answer. And I should say at this point, it feels kind of silly asking this question. This is playing into the very worst tech industry hype to be like, is this thing conscious? Have we created life? Are we as unto gods? And it's like, no, you work in an office. But I think it's something that's worth taking seriously and understanding why the answer is no, even if we are convinced that no, this is just a computer program. So how does something like this work? So the way something like ChatGPT works, and I'm taking ChatGPT as an exemplar of all the kinds of AI systems that are out there in the world today, it's what's called a feed-forward neural network. So it takes in input, it crunches that through a series of calculations, and it spits out an output. And in ChatGPT's case, what it's doing is predicting the next word, right? So what it does is it takes in the input, which is what you've said and everything that it's written so far, loads in a bunch of numbers off our hard disk, does some calculations with them, and spits them out. And at that point, it forgets everything, right? There is nothing that continues inside ChatGPT. You could imagine ChatGPT does not exist except in that very moment that it is predicting the next word, right? And there's this sort of annihilation of self happening after every word, right? It is predicting a word, and then it's throwing away everything, and then it's starting again from a blank slate. So there's no continuity of experience in something like this. There's no sense of memory. There's no sense of internal processes. There's just the calculations which are necessary to predict the next word. And because there's no continuity of experience, it's really hard to imagine, and I realize that I have said there are things that are impossible for us to imagine, but there is, it doesn't seem to me at least that it is possible for there to be anything in there which is conscious, which is experiencing the world, experiencing being itself, because there's nothing that continues. There's nowhere for that consciousness to live. Now, is everyone okay with that? I realize that's kind of an abstract argument. The interesting thing about that is really like it convinces people that it's conscious, even like the people who make these things. So this is a man you may have come across. He's a guy called Blake Lemoine. He was a software engineer at Google. He was fired. He says he was fired because he said that Google's chatbot Lambda was conscious. As far as I can tell, he was actually fired because he hired some lawyers to sue Google because he said that the chatbot was conscious, which I think is a really important detail to leave out of that story. But he was someone who worked with these things and knew how they were built and knew how they worked. And he became convinced after interacting with something which is more or less like ChatGPT, different piece of software, but working on the same principles. He was convinced that it was conscious and that, essentially Google had created life and trapped it in the basement. And I'm really pretty certain that he was wrong. But it's really interesting to me that he was convinced, that it was able to convince people like that. And, he's not the only one. There are definitely plenty of people who work on AI stuff who believe that these things are, if not conscious, then about to become conscious. There's always this sense that like, oh yeah, sure, we haven't done it today, but tomorrow you're going to see we're definitely making life tomorrow. And that's really interesting to me because our idea of intelligence is something which is often founded on an idea of deception. So most of you are probably familiar with the idea of the Turing test. So this is the idea came up with by Alan Turing. Honestly, it's been blown way out of proportion from what Turing ever originally proposed. But the idea was, okay, we don't know what intelligence really means. We don't know what intelligence is. But one way that you might think to test for it is to imagine like what a machine might be intelligent if it can convince you that it's human, if it can convince you that it is intelligent. And I think, Turing was writing when computers were the size of a room and the power of, I'm not even sure what exists anymore that has that little computing power. And I think the last 60 or 70 years of computer research have shown that this isn't actually a great way of thinking about it. But it sort of describes intelligence in terms of a very particular kind of intent. This idea that like something can only be intelligent if it wants to lie to you. Something can only be intelligent if it is capable of lying, if it is capable of deception, if it believes that pretending to be human would be a good idea. And that's just, to me, that's a bizarre idea. That's a like really quite odd way of thinking about the world. But it does mean that, maybe it says something about how we think about intelligence and about minds, that maybe we only think of things as having minds which are, in some sense, and I mean this in the very broadest sense, trying to imitate us. So what would a mind look like that wasn't trying to imitate a person? The science fiction writer Charles Stross came up with an idea back in, I think, 2017, suggesting that the first AIs were invented in the 17th century. That in the 17th century, we started to build autonomous machines designed to maximize particular values. This is the first of them. It was called the East India Company. But that essentially we invented the corporation. The corporation is a machine in a very broad sense. It's made of people and processes, but it is, essentially mechanical in its operation, and it is designed to maximize something. It's, in this case, shareholder value. And you can look at this as like, oh yeah, that's a bit analogous to something like ChatGPT. ChatGPT is trying to maximize the probability of the next word. The East India Company was trying to maximize the value for its shareholders. And these things now have taken over the world. The Terminator scenario has kind of happened, right? We have built AI, and they have taken over the world. And these AI are corporations. It's an idea. Not saying it's literally true. I'm not sure what it would mean for it to be literally true. But I think it's a really interesting lens to look at these things through. And something that's interesting about this is a corporation, if it has intelligence, and I think they do act in, appearingly intelligent ways, or at least as intelligent as, not perfectly intelligent, but reasonably intelligent ways. The intelligence is distributed. It's not that there is like a central brain controlling these things. It's a function of the people and the processes that make up the corporation. But this is something we see in nature all the time, right? So octopuses, or octopodes if you're a nerd, they have a distributed intelligence. So an octopus, 2/3 of its neurons are in its arms rather than its brain. It does have a brain, and it's definitely, the brain is in charge, but they have incredibly complex reflex systems and systems of communication between its arms. And an octopus can have thoughts that move between its arms without ever going through its brain. And they're clearly intelligent. They're able to solve complex problems. There are lots and lots of stories about octopuses in experimental situations absolutely running rings around the experimenters and escaping through little holes and waiting until people's backs are turned to sneak out of the tank or whatever. They're incredible creatures. And they're clearly intelligent. They really do not want to imitate people. If anything, they seem to just have a species-wide distaste for humans, which... and they are these, but they're clearly intelligent, but that intelligence is working in a much more distributed way than in something like a human. And, we could say, all right, well, yeah, ant colonies are another example. Ant colonies, like an individual ant is, we can say, oh, yeah, let's think about everything as having complex intelligence and minds, but ants are dumb as hell. But an ant colony as a whole is actually quite smart. It can make complex resource allocation decisions. And it does this through the interaction of lots and lots of ants. It doesn't do this as a single-minded creature. There's no boss ant telling everyone what to do. There's just a very complex, evolved system of interactions between ants. You can go even further. Look at something like slime mold. So slime molds are a self-organizing colony of microorganisms. They're really weird and kind of cool. There's like two microorganisms in here, an amoeba and a plasmodium. Do not ask me what either of those things means in depth. But essentially, it's a bunch of different microorganisms which live together, and they can self-organize in these complex ways. They can find like optimal routes between different kinds of food sources and so on, and pass food and things back and forth between them. And they do this in a way where like none of the individual amoebae or plasmodiae are intelligent, but the whole system acts like that. And honestly, really, this sort of distributed intelligence should not be surprising, because it's what we are, right? Our own brains are made of cells, right? None of those cells individually is smart, but when you add them all together, you get something which is greater than the sum of its parts, right? My intelligence is not the sum of the intelligence of every single brain cell. It's something else. It's something that arises from the interaction between these things. And it's kind of easy to see in this case where the components are just cells. But when you start talking about the components as being, people, intelligent beings in their own right, you starts to be a bit complex. So when I say that, a corporation might be an intelligent being, I am not talking about this guy, right? This is. I did a Google image search for businessman, and this is what came up. I've called him Steve Business. He's, Steve Business is a intelligent, valuable human being with thoughts and dreams and all the rest of it. He's probably conscious. But when I talk about corporations as intelligence, I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about the swarm. I'm talking about the hive, the collection. And it's like a brain made of individual cells, and those cells just happen to be people. And these form a machine which is neither more nor less intelligent than the people who make it up, but very different. So at this point, I should say, so yesterday, as she was leaving, Jo Lansdowne, our executive producer, my boss, she's in London today. Hi, Jo, you're watching. She said to me, good luck with your talk tomorrow. Don't say anything too extreme. Right? So, all right. I believe that in some circumstances, profit-maximizing corporations may not be the best way to do things. Right? I think I'm allowed to say that. They do bad things to the world. We have issues with them. And particularly now, these are starting, corporations are deploying AI, right? And we're seeing massive strikes in Hollywood. The Writers Guild of America, the Screen Actors Guild, are striking against the deployment of AI in their fields by the corporations who hold all the power in Hollywood. We're seeing similar things, like the creative industries in general are being really hit by the availability of a lot of these AI tools. It's a huge issue, both in terms of the actual facts on the ground, but also the rhetoric, the way people are imagining the future, the idea of is it going to be possible to have a career as an illustrator in 10 years' time is a real question that people are asking themselves. And I like to look at it, this is, we can look at this then as these two organisms coming together, right? The intelligent corporation and the intelligent AI. How intelligent each of them are, open question, but the two are coming together a bit like that slime mold and creating something which is new. And I think it's really easy to look at this in moral terms, right? Easy to say, these people are greedy, they shouldn't be doing this. But maybe it's more productive to think of this in terms of an ecological way. These are invasive species we have introduced. We have brought these things into a world, and now they are running riot. They are taken over. They're Japanese knotweed. And maybe the way we should be thinking about these things is, what does it mean to manage these things as part of an ecology, right? There's a sort of fallacy that ecologies are, real world ecologies are nice and balanced and lovely. And actually, no, they're not. The stuff comes in and takes over, and species go extinct, and things like Japanese knotweed run wild. If ecologies are to be kept in balance, they do require management. So that's something. Another question you can ask is, right, okay, so is that corporate intelligence conscious? That's a hard thing to ask. Does it understand language? Or is it just optimizing a sequence of words like ChatGPT? This is from the Apple website. Apple, biggest company in the world. What does that even mean, Apple? Are they just producing these sequences of words because they optimize shareholder value, or does the intelligence, the swarm intelligence, actually understand things? What concepts might fit inside its mind? If we complain and say that we want a kind, just, caring world, are those concepts that a corporate intelligence is actually capable of understanding? Do those fit inside its brain? And I want to leave us, because I know we're running out of time, with one question. So if we were to build a space probe and send it into the dark heart of the New York Stock Exchange, what message would we put on it? And how would we attempt to communicate? What are those building blocks that we would work up from to try and communicate some of these ideas to beings that exist entirely to maximize profit? All right, I'm going to leave it there. I'm just going to quickly say, if any of this excites you, then please go to our website. We've got some funding calls running at the moment. We've got our winter residencies, which are some artist residencies. They're on this very broad other minds topic. Anything that I've said today is definitely fair game for a topic for those, plus more. We also have our More Than AI sandbox, which is funding some projects around AI. That's a bit more focused on AI-driven projects, but there's a lot more money involved. So, take your pick. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
you. We've got a little bit of time for questions. And when I say questions, it can be questions. It can be things you've seen that you want to tell Martin about, other things you've seen that you're interested in. So it can be like observations, stuff you want to share, or questions, anything really. I'm going to come around with the mic for people in the room, just to explain that the mic doesn't amplify your voice in the space, so you need to kind of speak loudly and clearly, but what it does is it enables people who are watching online to be able to hear what you're saying. So if you can hold it up to your mouth while you're speaking, that would be great. Does anybody have anything?
Thank you, that was really fascinating. It was great to have so many different kinds of minds in that. It was really brilliant. I had a question about your belief in the difference between a human intelligence and a ChatGPT intelligence. Yeah. And I don't know whether I misheard you, but the way you explained it is that it has a bank of the user's input, things it's previously written, and then it does a probability to come with
When I say the things it's previously written, like the last few words it said to you, it has the record of the conversation you are currently having. It doesn't have a record of everything it's ever said, just the thing that it has been said in this conversation.
Right.
They may, there are records of every conversation that has ever been said with it, and those will probably be used to make new AI systems, but they're not available to it at the moment that it is having a conversation.
So if a version was made that did use every conversation it had ever had, I guess, is that a straight analogy to a human experience where, like, I don't consciously have everything I've ever had, like, in front of me, but I have a bank that I draw on?
I think that the difference for you is that you have an internal mental state. There's like, you are capable of having thoughts without saying them. ChatGPT is not. There is no continuity. If a thought arises when predicting one word, that gets thrown away before you predict the next word, unless it actually affected that word that it said, if that makes sense. So there's no way for it to remember anything to say later. It can only predict forward from the text that it has generated, which I think is the fundamental difference. There's no, it comes to each, it's like it has no short-term memory. It can't remember anything other than literally what it sees right now.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the amazing talk.
Oh, thank you.
I was wondering whether separating artificial intelligence and human intelligence actually is possible, because when we say artificial intelligence, it's kind of implied artificial human intelligence, because it is an engineered system that we have built based on how our brain works, how we understand things, right? It uses a different kind of fundamental principles of zeros and ones, but it's still from our comprehension of how stuff works.
I think there's still a very clear difference between the thoughts that I have and whatever is going on in the machine.
Oh, yes.
And like, I think you can imagine, all sorts of hybrid possibilities and things that might exist. In terms of the things that actually exist, I feel like there's a very clear distinction. Mm-hmm. You can imagine, what if we could simulate a human brain perfectly? Would that be a human or an artificial intelligence? And the answer is, we can't simulate a human brain perfectly, so let's not worry about that until it happens. I think, there is a sense that, yes, an AI is a extension of, if I write a computer program that does something, then in a sense, I did that, right? That is an extension of me, in the same way that, you could say, I didn't write this PowerPoint, my laptop did, and I just pressed the buttons. But in reality, like that sort of tool use extension of the self is definitely a thing that you can look at. And I think there's some really interesting stuff about, how would you use these tools to augment your own thought processes. and tools for thought and so on. You know, just going up to like simply being able to write things down is a huge extension of a human's memory.
Yeah, because currently it kind of feels like, I guess, a different flavor of still human-based intelligence that is kind of like a mirror in some ways of how we perceive the world, but it's different.
Yeah. We built these things in our own image.
Yeah.
We built these things to, and you know, that is the goal. If you want to make a machine that can talk to you, it needs to be in some ways like a human, because talking is a thing that humans do.
Yeah. Cool, thank you.
We got some online, I think.
Oh, I'll come back to you. I'll just do this one first and we'll go to you, Larry.
Thank you very much for the talk. One thing you didn't mention explicitly, you can't cover everything, obviously, is how much communication is non-audio communication between people, but also the example you gave of the woman with the dolphin. Presume that relationship was developed to a large extent on non-audio communication.
Absolutely, yeah.
And most people's relationship with their cat and their dog, there's the odd woof and the odd meow, but that's mainly non-verbal, non-audio communication as well.
Yeah, and you know,
it's so easy
deaf people exist. People have communications through, and our most of our relationships with anyone, with other humans, with any sort of artificial or animal intelligence, comes through living in the world with those things, or people or things or whatever. It's sometimes because of technological limitations, you have to really narrow down that communication pathway, and sometimes it's like, you know, you're not going to get anywhere unless you focus somewhere first. But I totally agree. Like, many of these forms of communication only work in the context of much broader ways of living together. I mean, you know, there's quite a lot of theories that dolphin communication is partly visual, that they also wiggle their bodies at the same time, and you see the flash of different, because they've got lighter and darker bits of their body, and that actually listening to the sound on its own gets you nothing. Don't know if that's true. I'm not a dolphin biologist, but...
Thank you. I've got a question from Brendan, who asks, it seems like there is a concept here of emergent intelligence, complex systems showing new behaviors that look like intelligence. Is intelligence just emergence?
I think there are emergent systems that are not intelligent. I think, you know, intelligence is a very fuzzy term. Like, what does intelligence actually mean? But like, it's kind of one of those I don't want to see it things. But I think, you know, you could take the climate system as being an emergent system that is not particularly intelligent. It's not trying to solve problems or trying to, you know, have thoughts. That, you know, maybe it is actually useful to think of the climate system as an intelligent system. I don't know, I haven't tried. But I think there is a difference. I think it may well be that all intelligence is emergent. I don't think all emergent things are intelligent.
Thank you for that. That was great. I'm really happy that slime molds were in there. I wanted to ask you what you thought about the limits that we place on the limits that humans place on allowing ourselves to believe in consciousness and intelligence, because it feels like we're really happy to believe in other things being intelligent right up to the point that it threatens our ability to exploit them for our own ends. And we can see that we've done this to people. You know, octopuses have passed tests for 8-year-old children, and you know, what is this? I just wondered if there's if your research has explored those limits that we place on our own research for our own limits.
I think there's definitely strong cases of kind of motivated reasoning in both directions. People who like to believe things are not intelligent because then they don't feel bad about eating them or whatever. And there are also people who, similarly, the AI guys who like to believe that their pet AI is going to become God one day because it makes them feel important. And, in neither of those cases are people really, operating from a position of neutrality, whatever that means. I would say there's a real danger in equating intelligence with moral value. That saying something is intelligent, therefore it is worthy of protection. Because that leads you down the route of, more intelligent people are more morally valuable. Less intelligent people are less morally valuable. And that very quickly leads to some dark places. I think it's worth really interrogating where we believe that moral value comes from. And that's not to say that, we think that, animals are without value even though they're intelligent. It means that we need to be conscious that we're not making some assumptions that have some really dark implications later on.
Got another question from Michael. It was more of a statement, but Michael says, while you're focusing on the intelligence in institutions that exist to maximize profit, we do have other corporations which exist for alternative aims like public good. What about organizations with different aims like Watershed?
Okay, I'm pretty sure Michael works for the BBC, so yeah. I mean, and I think, what about the government of the UK? What about, or just the UK as an object? Is that an intelligent being? I think, I don't say anything too extreme, Martin. I think I went in here with corporations because they're very clear sort of, there's a clear example to point to. I think you can start to talk about what is the intelligence inherent in any organization or collection of people, but that gets very, very abstract very quickly. So I didn't do that. But thanks, Michael.
Is there anything else from anyone?
Cheers. Yeah, it was really good. Really enjoyed it. I like the fact that you took something that is very trendy now, but you talked about it over a wider time period than just this little trending moment. Do you feel like actually this is just an ongoing kind of quest for knowledge and kind of conversation that's been going on for a long time? And why is it suddenly trendy?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's talked to me for more than 10 or 15 minutes will know I'm really interested in technology trends and how these things weirdly blow up and occupy people's minds. But I think, there have been a bunch of trends recently, cryptocurrency or whatever, where they blew up and then they died, and it's because there was actually nothing at the base of it. I think what's interesting about the current trend in AI is, there are genuine material changes. There are things that we can do now that we could not do 5 years ago, and those are going to have material effects in the world, right? That question of can you be an illustrator in 10 years' time? That's a real question. That's not a trendy hype question. That's an actual question that is going to worry a lot of people. And so I think there's some of these questions, what is consciousness is a question that's, I'm sure people were debating around campfires while fending off Neanderthals. But the question of, how do we live in a world where corporations are deploying AI is one that only really matters if corporations are deploying AI. So, I think this has become important because it's having effects on the world now. Why it's quite caught on to the degree of like complex public interest is a wider question and probably not one we have time to get into. But you know, let's have a beer.
Great. Thank you.
More at the back.
Okay, this will have to be the last one, I think.
I got one more from Brendan who asks, what about intelligence in processes? I heard recently about participation as understanding.
Okay, yeah. Like, I think intelligent, you know, sort of the ChatGPT example does sort of say intelligence is a process. It's a thing that happens. It's not a static thing that you know, that question of consciousness as being what is it like to be something is, it's not like what is it like to be something in any individual snapshot of a moment. It's like, what is that continued process of being something? And so I would say that like all intelligence is a process. And I think what Brendan's probably getting at there is more something like this idea that, you know, you rearrange the parts into a different form and you get a different form of intelligence. And that's sort of, yeah, the corporation. It's not that the intelligence comes from the arrangement of the people. That like those people had their own intelligence before, but you put them together into this organization and something new emerges. So yes, it's that emergence thing again.
That's great. Thank you, Martin. Give you a warm thank you. Thank you so much for coming along today. I just wanted to do a quick plug before we end. We're hosting a really brilliant documentary theatre show on the 31st of October here at Watershed, which is by an artist called Victoria Melody. She's going to kind of delve into stand-up comedy and kind of making peace with a messy mind. And she kind of performs on stage with a headset that scans her brain waves as she's performing. It will be really brilliant. So that's in the evening of the 31st. It's booking through the box office, so we would love to see some of you at that. But back to today, if you want to stick around on Hot Desk, you're very welcome to. And you can also find out more about what we do as well. If you're new to the studio today, you can find one of the studio team if you want to do either of those things, which is Martin, myself, Laura, Tim at the back today. And if you're watching online, if you've got any questions or want to know anything more, you can drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk. That's it for today. Thank you so much, Martin, and we'll see you all next time.
Don't forget.